Environmental microbiology, treatment of water, waste, and polluted habitats. Most people living in developed countries take for granted that their tap water is safe to drink, their waste will disappear into sewers and landfills, and pollutants will not accumulate in the environment. They seldom consider the role that microbes play in these essential aspects of modern life. Microorganisms are important in the treatment of water, waste, and polluted environments. Microbes are the ultimate recyclers, playing an essential role in the decomposition of our waste. Pathogenic microorganisms and viruses must be eliminated from sewage before water can be considered potable or safe for human consumption. Wastewater, or sewage, is composed of all the material that flows from household plumbing systems, including washing and bathing water, and everything that goes down your toilet. If untreated sewage is released into a river or a lake that is then used as a source of drinking water, disease can easily spread. If marine waters become contaminated with untreated sewage, consumption of the shellfish that live there and grow there can result in disease as well. Americans use about 150 gallons of fresh water per day, and we produce about 120 gallons of wastewater per day and about 5 pounds of trash per day. The biochemical oxygen demand, or the BOD, is the amount of oxygen required to biodegrade the waste in the water. BOD of raw sewage is approximately 300 to 400 milligrams per liter of sewage, which could easily deplete the dissolved oxygen in the water that's receiving that sewage. BOD directly affects the amount of dissolved oxygen, or DO, in rivers and streams. The greater the BOD, the more rapidly oxygen is depleted in the stream, so it's an inverse relationship. More BOD means less DO. In order for organisms to survive, they have to have enough dissolved oxygen. So this means that less oxygen is available to higher forms of aquatic life. The consequences of high BOD are the same as those for low dissolved oxygen. Aquatic organisms become stressed, they suffocate, and they die. Sources of BOD include leaves and woody debris, dead plants and animals, animal manure, effluents from pulp and paper mills, wastewater treatment plants, feedlots like from agricultural livestock, food processing plants, failing septic systems, and urban storm water runoff. So water runoff that's coming from our streets and our houses and our yards. You don't need to memorize how to run a BOD test, but it's right here if you want to read about it. The DO content of natural waters is about 5 to 10 milligrams per liter. Oxygen can be replenished in water sources by mixing up the water, which is called re-aeration, or by photosynthesis, so organisms in the water that are actually creating oxygen and putting it into the water. Typical BOD values, so you can compare, automotive antifreeze is about 600,000 milligrams per liter. Meatpacking waste is 5,000 milligrams per liter. Our domestic, so from household, wastewater is 300 milligrams per liter. And wastewater treatment plants effluent, so that's like the treated water that they put back into a natural system, has got to be less than 30 milligrams per liter. Okay, so sewage treatment. You do need to know the major processes in sewage treatment. So in the US, we use this two-series process. Typically, we do a primary treatment and a secondary treatment. Any advanced treatment is optional based on the municipality or the location. Primary treatment removes about 50% of the solids and about 25% of the BOD. Secondary treatment eliminates up to 95% of the remaining BOD. Any advanced treatment is going to be things like purification processes that are not common, they're expensive. Some are designed to remove specific things like ammonia, nitrates, and phosphates. Once we've treated the water, the liquid portion is now called effluent, and it's discharged into a body of water. The solid portion is termed sludge and is further treated in an anaerobic digester. And then whatever is left after that's been treated, we can bury it in the landfill. So primary treatment is the physical process of removing materials that settle out of the liquid. So this is going to be things like toilet paper and Barbie doll heads, right, that got flushed down the toilet. This treatment removes about 50% of the solids. The sewage passes through a series of screens to remove the objects. Skimmers remove scum and floating debris that floats on top of the wastewater. The sewage is allowed to settle in what's called a sedimentation tank. This facilitates the removal of the solids. The sludge is removed after settling is complete, and primary sewage that remains is then sent for secondary treatment. Secondary treatment is primarily a biological process. It's designed to convert the suspended solids to inorganic compounds and cell mass for removal. This eliminates nearly 95% of the remaining BOD. Microbial growth is encouraged during this secondary treatment. Aerobic organisms will degrade the organic material to carbon dioxide and water. Methods used in secondary treatment include activated sludge, trickling filters, lagoons, and artificial wetlands. And we're going to go through each of those. Activated sludge is a wastewater treatment system that uses a variety of aerobic microbes. These organisms grow in biofilms, which we call flocks. A large number of organisms inoculated into the sewage via addition of small amounts of leftover sludge from the time before. Oxygen is supplied and the organic matter is converted to biomass, or the waste product. The sewage is sent to the sedimentation tank. The flocks settle out and the resulting sludge is removed. A portion of that sludge is used for the next batch. Trickling filters are frequently used in smaller treatment plants. A rotating arm sprays sewage over a bed of coarse gravel and rocks. The rocks and gravel become coated with biofilms of a heterogeneous mix of bacteria, fungus, algae, protozoa, and nematodes. The organisms will aerobically degrade the organic material. So in this case, the water came in from primary treatment here. It comes up through these tubes. It's going to spray down over the gravel and the rocks where all the microbes are. And the microbes are going to break down that waste, that organic matter. The cleaner water is going to filter down to the bottom. And then it's going to either go to an advanced treatment or back to a natural system like a river or a lake. Artificial outdoor lagoons can be created as well to treat wastewater. The sewage is channeled into shallow ponds or lagoons, and it remains there for a specific period of time. Algae and cyanobacteria grow on the surface to provide oxygen, which enables the aerobic microbes to degrade the sewage. And then the last type of water treatment we're going to talk about is artificial wetlands. These are really cool. They're kind of like lagoons, but they have a more advanced design. They provide habitat for birds and other wildlife that's safe. So first, the sewage is aerated to stimulate the aerobic organisms that break down the waste. Water flows into the marsh, where the pollutants are further metabolized by bacteria and other microbes that are attached to the plant roots. In the pond, algae feed on and transform the harmful nutrients. The meadow grasses trap pollutants that are flowing down. And then water flowing all the way down to this area is now cleared of pollutants and carried into a lake, stream, or river. So typically, right after secondary treatment, but it's not technically tertiary treatment, is when we disinfect the water. So at any municipality, they're going to use one of these types of disinfection techniques before they discharge the effluent back into a body of water. So they can either use chlorine, ozone, or UV light, ultraviolet light, to kill microbes and viruses in the water before sending it back to a natural system. The anaerobic digester, so microbes break down the biodegradable material in the absence of oxygen, anaerobic. Many treatment plants use generated methane to power their equipment. The remaining sludge is dehydrated, so the water is removed to form stabilized sludge, which is a nutrient-rich product. It can be incinerated or burned, placed in the landfill, or even used as fertilizer to improve soils. So let's say you live outside of the city limits and you're not on a sewer system. If your house is further out and you're not near a sewer, you're going to have a septic tank for your sewage disposal. Wastewater is collected in a large tank that's buried under the ground somewhere around your house. Sometimes it's in the front yard, sometimes it's in the side yard, sometimes it's in the backyard. It all depends on the landscape. The solid material is going to settle down to the bottom, and it's going to be degraded by organisms. The fluid overflow has a very high BOD, so it must be passed through a drainage field in order to increase the dissolved oxygen and decrease the BOD before it goes back down into the groundwater. So you have water entering the septic tank from your house. This is going to be all your toilets flushing, your sinks draining, all of that. You have vents because a lot of the bacteria are going to be aerobic at the top here, and so they need air. You're going to have scum that kind of builds up at the top. All the solids fall to the bottom. So eventually, it's typically between 5 and 7 years, you're supposed to get your septic tank sucked out every 5 to 7 years because it will fill up with that solid material. And so the water is going to go through, and then it's going to go through an outlet. It's going to go through a drainage field that's basically lined with gravel and sand, and it gets filtered further through the leach field, which is also in your yard. It's underneath the ground. And it's going to eventually just seep back out into the underground system and eventually back to the underground water table. Okay, drinking water. It's so important that our drinking water is clean, or else we could end up with a number of diseases: dysentery, diarrhea, giardia, you name it, it can be in the water. Large cities generally obtain drinking water from surface waters like lakes or rivers. All of our water comes from Lake Lanier. Surface waters may act as receiving waters for sewage effluent as well. So once our sewage goes through one of our treatment plants, it does get dumped back into Lake Lanier. So Lake Lanier receives our, quote, cleaned effluent sewage water, right? But then we're also pulling from Lake Lanier for our drinking water. So when we pull for our drinking water, it goes through a whole different process in order to make it potable for us to drink and safe. Smaller communities often use groundwater as a drinking water source. Like you can use a well. If you have a well dug down and you get water from the well, then you're not using water from municipalities. The primary concern regarding safety of drinking water is the possibility of gastrointestinal pathogens. It's not feasible to test for all of these pathogens in the treatment process, so they test for indicator organisms that are routinely found in feces. All right, step 1. Water is held in a series of reservoirs where large materials will sediment down. Aluminum potassium sulfate, which we call alum, may be added to cause flocculation of organic matter, which then also settles out in the settling basin. The water is filtered through beds of sand, which removes almost all the bacteria. Filtration through activated charcoal may be used to remove toxic or objectionable organic materials. And finally, in step 3, chlorination is used to disinfect the water, killing any pathogens that might remain. It's possible to treat drinking water with UV radiation as well, or with ozone, so that it does not have to be chlorinated. Some cities also add fluoride to protect against dental cavities. And then it comes through your faucet. For our solid waste, like the trash that you fill up in your trash cans in the kitchen, we typically use sanitary landfills. They are widely used to dispose of non-hazardous solid waste. The manner that minimizes damage to human health and the environment, obviously, is ideal. It must be located away from sensitive areas, like agricultural sites. The site is excavated, which means you dig out all the dirt, you line it with a really thick plastic membrane over a bed of clay, because clay is really thick, which will minimize the leaching, which is the draining of that waste as it breaks down, going down into our drinking water. Waste is compacted and covered with layers of soil that typically occurs daily. Landfills that are no longer in use are covered with soil and plants and can then be used for recreation or construction. Methane and other gases are vented, so they put these giant pipes down in the ground so that any buildup of gases underneath all those layers can escape and it won't cause an explosion. Bacteria and fungi are important in solid waste being broken down faster as well. A healthy alternative to landfills would be composting. You can do backyard composting, or we can have commercial composting, which just means on a larger scale. Backyard composting involves mixing debris. Waste is reduced by 2/3 in a matter of months. The black organic material can then be used in your garden beds as fertilizer. The compost pile usually starts with a supply of organic material. Often some soil and water are then added. The inside of the pile can heat up to like 55 to 60 degrees Celsius, which is really hot. Pathogens are killed, but the thermophilic organisms are unaffected. Aeration of the pile by stirring occurs when the pile cools down. And composting on a large scale is a way to reduce garbage going to landfills, but special machinery is used for large-scale composting. So large-scale composting takes a little bit longer. They typically let it cure in piles for about 18 months before they actually bag up that compost and then resell it as fertilizer. Backyard composting, though, is pretty simple. You can do it in a number of different ways. So in our backyard, we actually have 2 different compost systems. We have one that's just a big pile, and we have it surrounded with a gate, and we throw the yard waste in there, like twigs and leaves and pine straw, and then you can throw some kitchen waste in there, but you don't put any meats or dairy or fats in there. So you put like veggies and fruits and peels, like banana peels and orange peels, and so you mix all of that in there, and you mix it up. Typically, once a week is good. I also have a rotating drum compost system in the backyard, where we spin it around, and so it's a lot easier to rotate, and aerate and get some air in there. And every time I find some worms in the backyard, I add them in there. So when you add worms to a compost, it's called vermicomposting, and the worms will help the bacteria to break down all of the organic matter. And eventually it turns into nice fertilized soil that you can put back into your yard for your veggies and your plants.